How you doing, folks? You're watching Live with Onrie, and I'm your host, Onrie Compen. This week's guest is somebody that really gave me a lot of guidance and lit the way for me when I was first getting my start in comics. When you first put yourself out there and you start submitting your work, you often wonder if anybody's actually really paying attention. And then you start to get those automated rejections, and it makes you wonder if anybody's actually reading your work. I was really pleased because when I submitted my book to one publisher, the editor responded. And at that point, he was no longer associated with the publisher, but he still reached out to me, and he, spent hours on the phone with me explaining what I could be doing, some other alternatives I could use to get my work out there, and it worked. And I kept in touch with him, and over the years, we've become friends. And of course, we don't see each other as much as we'd like to, but it is a complete honor and a sincere pleasure to host him on the show today. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dave Elliot. Dave, how are you doing, sir?
Well, I hope I can live up to that.
You have, absolutely. And I will say this for everybody who's watching right now: YI SOON SHIN would not be where it is or what it is if it was not for you. You kind of steered me in the direction of self-publishing.
Oh no, it's like, look, we talked about this just right before we came on air. It's like, yeah, I mean, I hopefully I helped at least point you in the right direction. But you already had a great idea. You had great artists involved. You kind of knew what you wanted to do. And I've seen you in action at conventions. The way you sell your book is, it's just, I wish I could do that. I really wish I could do that the way you do.
Well, as much
so hats off. No, seriously, man, hats off to you. You did an amazing job. So if I helped, great.
You have.
That was all
you
you
absolutely have. And as much as I love praise and hearing people talk about how great I am, I would love for you to tell us about you, because you're the center of the spotlight today. So do us a favor, tell us all who you are, what you do, and then we're going to kick it off from there, and we're going to have a great episode full of awesome comic book goodness.
Oh, God. Well, I'm one of those people that people lovingly refer to as a veteran of the comics industry, which basically means you've been here around way too long. So I started out as an editor, but I wanted to draw. I basically got my first job in editing through my portfolio, and I basically became art director for a new comics publisher. But from there, I became a comics artist. For several years, I made my living as predominantly an inker for Marvel, DC, Fleetway. But like a lot of comics creators, there was an urge to do my own thing, want to do more. And I was fortunate enough, a very good friend of mine, Gary Leach, the co-creator of what is now referred to as Miracle Man, Marvel Man. We started a publishing company together. And our first book was A1, anthology book with everybody under the sun. We eventually managed to get to contribute to the series we did. And, from there, it became sort of, I had my editor's hat on more than I had my creator's hat on. Never really giving up on the creator side, but when I, got married, had 2 kids, you, rather than sort of, inking jobs when you can get them, you want to get a decent sort of paying job at a publishing company, which is what I did. So that publishing company was Penthouse Magazine. So I worked for them for like 8-9 years, but still managed to do it. Like I did a creator-owned series for Image during that time. Still managed to do other work. So, and started, that was when I started to get involved with Hollywood. The comic I did for Image got optioned, it nearly got made. But from there, it's, I ended up doing a lot of work with different production companies, giving advice, rewriting people's treatments and proposals, doing development. Eventually formed Radical Studios, which made the Hercules movie with The Rock, and Oblivion with Tom Cruise. Yeah, sort of, you know, Hollywood does tend to spit you up, you know, chew you up a bit. Yeah, I've done, you know, everything. I've done production. I've done I've done my own lettering on certain books. Done coloring. You name it. I don't think there's any. I've done my own logos. There's nothing I haven't really done. So yeah,
it's all, and you know, I gotta say, that's one of the things that I wanted to speak to real quick, because I remember we were having a conversation exactly 10 years ago.
Right.
And it was at this point that I got tired of getting rejected from publishers, and I was realizing, okay, I want to get out there and start selling stuff. And I remember you had told me that the actual sale of the comic is kind of like selling a movie ticket. You're selling that advanced screening ticket to your audience. You're building something that is basically showing producers and everybody that, look, if you make a movie based on this property, it's going to sell these tickets because the books are out there. And honestly, Dave, that has been the driving force of my strategy for the last 10 years. Where did you develop this idea? And like, you know, how did your experiences working in comics kind of like help you figure it all out?
It just made sense to me. I think what I've always striven to do, and like the ideas that were originally behind the formation of Radical Studios was a concept and a way of working that I'd had for over 10 years. It was being able to have a creator-friendly company. But what we would do is, I think that one of the things a lot of people do with their comics is they write their film script, and then they try illustrating it, and that's the comic. And I've always advised against that. And my approach has been more, don't think of the film script. Don't like, you know, sure. Think about your story, think about the characters, but dive really deep into them. Don't start writing that screenplay until you know every single one of your characters back to front. You know, like, even if you don't, like, you know that half of the things that you're going to come up with are never going to make it into the comic or any film or anything like that. But the more you know a character, you yourself know a character, the more that they have a personality that you can give them. And you'll find when you're scripting, because you know them so well, you can actually start sowing seeds of their character and their backstory in without wasting any time.
Now, Dave, I want to say you're selling yourself short a bit here, because for those of you guys who haven't seen Hercules, the Thracian Wars, or there was a second, was that the second volume or the first volume?
That was the first volume.
That was the first volume. So there's 2 volumes of this book. It is very beautifully illustrated and overseen by Dave. And here's the thing about it. Not every movie gets adapted, but not every movie gets picked up either by one of the top paid actors in the entire industry of entertainment. Right. The Rock is cast and has played Hercules. It doesn't matter if the movie was the greatest thing in the world. It doesn't matter. The fact that you actually saw that whole process come together and were a part of it. And here was the thing that I really loved about that book, was that Hercules' power was not really like, it was almost more like a metaphorical thing. Like, it wasn't like something you would just constantly see. It was like Could a normal man do this? Possibly, if he had
Right.
the right implementation, or if he was in the right scenario, he could possibly do it. But the character really, it was a comic book before it was a movie. As I read it, as I saw the illustrations, I didn't see like, okay, these guys are just trying to throw, this into a movie as quickly as possible. I saw that you guys really cared about what you were doing. There was something there.
Well, all right. Well, so let me just tell you my approach on that project, and that was the first comic we published, or it was one. It was but we launched 2 comics, and that was one of them, the first month. So let me tell you why I selected that one and my approach to it. First off, when I came up with the idea of doing Hercules, to be honest, I did it because I knew that it was in public domain, and it was something that you'd likely have heard of. I also looked at the history of Hercules in media. We'd had 8 years of Hercules, the Legendary Journeys, the Sam Raimi produced TV series. We'd had Disney making a kind of a younger version, the kids' animated Hercules film. So I knew that not only was it in public domain, but people would be familiar with it. And because we'd had a Disney movie several years before, and because we'd had a TV movie, which was, you have the limitations of TV, I thought that it was the right time to do a Hercules project that was R-rated. It didn't have to be R-rated, but I thought that we went in with the approach of pretty much being R-rated, even though the comic had to be, we wanted it in comic stores, so we aimed for sort of PG-13. So we kept away from nudity, but it was certainly quite violent. But the main thing was, and this is when your editorial hat comes on, and you're trying to do a good project. You want it to be good. I fought very hard with my partners, who basically their approach was, hey, let's get Steve Niles to write it. And I was like, why would Steve want to write it? And it was like, no, he did 20 Days of Nights, so 30 Days of Nights, so he's made a film, so we'll have a name.
Yeah, you'll have something to attach it with.
Yeah. So we went to Steve, and thank God Steve's approach was like, what the fuck are you asking me to do Hercules for? I'm a horror guy. And we went to a couple of other similar creators who, they'd optioned or sold a script. Most cases hadn't got made. And finally, they let me go with the creator I wanted to do it, which was the writer Steve Moore. And Steve's not instantly known to a lot of people. He's probably known better here in the UK. He's done a ton of work here. Later on, he's became a lot more well-known after his friend Alan Moore brought him on board to help him with the ABC.
Friends? I thought they were cousins.
No, they were just good friends. They're good friends. And I think, Alan will tell you that Steve was probably much more of a mentor to Alan, because Steve is hands down one of the best writers I've ever worked with. Incredibly scrupulous, dedicated, but very much just like Alan Moore in that just won't take crap, and he won't do something he doesn't really, it's very difficult to get him to do something he doesn't want to do. In this instance, I went to him with a project that I knew he'd be interested in. It's set in a time period that he was an expert in. Steve has written history books. So, we actually, it was Steve's suggestion, like, let's go with setting it in the Bronze Age, which is the actual time period where the myths of Hercules first originated from. And he came up with the idea of mixing it with both mythological characters and real historical characters and events of that time. So at that point, it was pretty much it's all yours, Steve. Off you go. Because I knew at that point there was no more I could offer to the project on, at least on a story basis, because there's nothing I could tell Steve about the time period. He's just too damn good a writer. The only thing that I wanted from the get-go was I wanted to treat Hercules like Jesus. I didn't want this to be a, Hercules talking to Zeus and things like that. It's very much in this world, the gods are believed to exist, but we never see them. So in the comic, we do actually see them a couple of times, but it's only when people are talking about them. So it's I might be talking to you, and then we actually visualized what that conversation was, but it's not actually Zeus there. So literally that was the approach, and Steve did a absolute fantastic job. I mean, what I loved about it was I'm a big fan of the Seven Samurai and Magnificent Seven, and I didn't give any hints of this to Steve at all. This is what he came up with. I felt that he gave me basically a Seven Samurai Hercules story.
He totally did, and I remember it's been a long time since I've read it, and I actually just pulled it out today, right before our interview. I was going to bring it here and show folks where it is, right. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to post a link in the comments section afterwards. If you guys can find this book, I highly recommend you pick it up. It's a beautifully illustrated book, and I remember that there were some other characters, and Hercules was the central figure, but there were other characters as well that kind of push the story forward. It wasn't like we were always seeing things from Hercules' point of view. We were almost kind of like stepping outside of him and looking at him as he was perceived through these other characters.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like Steve came up with a story arc for 3 graphic novels, and we only ever did 2 of them. But he came up with a 3-volume arc, but we built out the world, and it was kind of, in a way, when you have someone like The Rock involved on a project like this, invariably both he and the studio want a Rock project. And whereas personally, as someone who helped give birth to this project, I would have probably been a lot happier if it had been a group of people that we half seen before, or kind of reasonably well known, had more of an ensemble cast, so that all of the characters could have had more of a play. Because even though it was a Hercules graphic novel, Steve wrote it as an ensemble. Like, yes, there was a more of a focus on Hercules, but the supporting cast was very much part of the narrative that kind of got very short shift in the film adaptation.
Yeah, The Rock had to be the center focus of it. And how did it make you feel? Were you happy with the adaptation? I mean, were you able to
really?
Like you?
I mean, look, it's more of a Hollywood story, I guess, behind it is I was supposed to be one of the producers on the film, and basically, when we originally sold, we first had the film optioned by a studio that's no longer around, Rogue Pictures. They originally optioned it, and in the contract, I was a producer on it. It went into, it didn't end up going with Rogue because we gave them a limited window of an option, and they didn't meet the criteria. And Rogue actually kind of owned, it was owned by Universal. So Rogue Pictures was kind of what New Line was to Warner Brothers. But because now Universal knew about the project, they wanted to take a look, and we did a deal with Universal on it. And originally we had Peter Berg attached to direct it. and the script at that point, whereas the way it was developing, was a much more faithful adaptation of the graphic novel, and that was before The Rock was involved. Well, my partners decided to do the deal behind my back, and lo and behold, I'm no longer part of the project, considering I completely developed it.
You know, I'm sorry if I'm bringing up bad memories here. I'm just
no, but I'm telling you,
I hear about your experiences. I'm fascinated by everything. If you're,
but you see, the thing is, it's just no, that's okay, because you see, the thing is, it's a useful, like, if you know, you have, like, even one of the things I've learned is, even when you think the people around you can trust, invariably when it comes to big money and things like this, you know, you've really got to look after yourself, and you've got to, you know, someone you've known, even in this case, like one of my partners, Radical, I'd known for several years, and I'd helped him out in many different times, and I honestly thought he had my back, and that was very foolish of me. I wish I could say it, I wish I could say it was the last time I did it, but it's not. But you know, you learn, and it was my, you know, I should have known better.
But you know what? Rather than focus on the negative of that, I still like to look at the positive of what came about. You know?
Oh no! So what came about was, yeah. I mean, it's you know, the process though. The other part that I skipped over is in also bringing Steve Moore onto the project. Before I formed Radical, I actually worked on a couple of projects where I'd been lucky enough to work with Weta Workshop, you know, who did Lord of the Rings and King Kong, etc. So I reached out to Richard Taylor and said, hey, look, we're doing Hercules as a comic book, but we want to ultimately make it as a movie. Would you be interested in coming on board and helping us design what the costumes would look like, the period stuff? Because the thing I love about Weta is they've got so many experts there who they love, like, they're each of these artists are historians. So they kind of go, oh, a Bronze Age project, cool. I'm going to get to be able to draw this armor and design something for that time period. Most of the designs for Hercules was done by Weta, and they actually worked on the movie as well. But the actual look for Hercules, I went to an old friend of mine, Jim Storenko, and I asked Jim to design the look of Hercules and do the first cover, which he did. And he also designed the logo for the comic as well, because he's just a fantastic logo. He's just one of those guys who's just...
He's Jim Steranko. I mean, he's
Jim Steranko. Well, what do you need to say? He's Jim Steranko. Yeah. Well, so when you have a portfolio of art that you can walk into Universal and say, oh, here's Jim Steranko. Oh, here's Weta Workshop. Here's the outline. Here's some of the pages we've already been working on. And the artwork was produced by some of the amazing artists out of Singapore and Jakarta. It was a company then called Imaginary Friends Studios. And that was how I got to meet people like Art Germ, who's now probably the #1 cover artist in the world, and one of the best colorists in the world, Sonny Go, and it's also his birthday today. So happy birthday, Sonny.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Well, you know, I think it's really amazing how all of this stuff comes together. And the thing that I think is really cool too is there's greater roles to be played in comic books than simply writing and drawing them or coloring or lettering them. It's what you do with the actual property. There's a lot of creativity involved in that. Right. And just from everything you're telling me, it's not just about you know, putting something together and hoping it'll stick. It's really studying what is missing, where you think you can add value, and then putting yourself out there in a way that attracts the right people and allows the project to soar in directions that exceed the initial imprint of comics and see it blossom into something much greater. And we're talking about just one project you've had here. You've been working in this industry a very long time. You've seen a lot of things happen. And one of the things you were very interested in discussing with me prior to coming onto the show is, the current state of the industry and where things are going, because obviously we've gotten hit really hard this year. I was telling you before when we were backstage, like, my distribution method is basically disrupted completely. And we're kind of looking to the future now. So as putting on your analytical hat,
right,
where do you see things going, and what's your take on what's happening right here and now?
I think, and quite honestly, I hope that we get back to conventions again, and where we're seeing our creators in person. I think what I hope isn't going to go away is the precautions we're taking at the moment. People washing their hands more regularly, wearing masks. Because if you look back, you even go back to as far as like I remember seeing a ad online recently back in 1918 when at the end of the war, it was still, they were asking people to wear masks to stop colds and sneezing and things like that, because there was an epidemic at the time. And we've always had epidemics. We've always had, we get a flu season every year. And, one of the things we've heard a lot, particularly in the build up to COVID-19, was a lot of people saying, oh, come on, it's just another flu germ. It's just another flu bug. Look at how many people die every year of the flu. COVID-19 is different, and it is stronger, and it is much more violent. And I know people who have died from it. I know people who've had it, and they, believe me, they don't want to go through that again. However, even once we've got a vaccine, if we can be more careful, we wash our hands more, wear a mask, think of all those people that have been dying every year from just the flu. What if we could actually cut those numbers down because we're all being more careful? That would be a great thing. So, I look at it this way is, yes, let's be more careful. Let's be more respectful of each other. I wear a mask when I go out, and I'm not wearing the mask for me. I'm wearing it for you. And that's what we have to remember. It's when you wear that mask, you're telling somebody else, I'm doing this for you. And could you wear a mask for me? So, but I think that it's going to get back to normal. I think the thing that I'm more worried about, I won't say worried about, I'm concerned, is the aspect of the industry that we refer to as the direct sale market. On the whole, it's no longer a massive part of the industry anymore.
It has been for a long time.
Yeah, and a lot of people who are so used to getting their comics from just going into the comic store and picking up their comics, if their comic store closes down, they really think to themselves, that's it. It's not. You can buy the comics directly from the publisher, directly from the creator. Kickstarter.
Amazon.
In fact, I've spent more money on comic book Kickstarters in the last 6 months than I've spent in comics in the last 3 years. So there's plenty of ways and means to get your comics, and because of the infrastructure of Marvel and DC, they're bigger, so they can take the brunt of making a big shift to digital, which is probably coming.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's funny, Dave, because I remember when you and I were having drinks in New York 10 years ago, and DC was going through another crisis where they had another massive round of layoffs. This is like they weren't doing that great either, and everybody was talking about the looming presence of digital and how it was going to take over. But even as a self-publisher who distributes digitally, I just don't see any revenue stream from it. And I like to have the physical book, but I also understand that having digital presence is exceptional too. It's great to have both options,
Well, I think that's it. It's, when you, I would say probably almost for the majority of people on Comixology, they're finding that they make a little bit, but it's more about people being exposed to your book. If I go onto Comixology and if I want to see your book, I can go onto Comixology and I can preview, I can go through all the issues and I can see 4 pages from each issue, so I can get a good sense of what it looks like. Now I can actually I can go down to my retailer, or more likely I'm going to go onto Amazon or even buy it directly from you because I want a physical copy. I think the one thing we've seen over the last particularly 5 years is Comixology's sales have plateaued because there is overwhelmingly people are like, well, this is cool, I can read my comics, but I do want a physical edition. I do want to hold it in my hands. So I think that yes, we're going to see more of Marvel and DC's shifting to kind of periodicals on through Comixology, but when it gets collected, you'll buy the physical copy. Most comic book shops I've seen over the last few years as well had slowly been making that shift from back issues, less space for back issues, more space for new titles, more space for graphic novels, because where do you put all these graphic novels that are coming out? So I think at some point we'll just start, you'll go into a comic book store and it'll be the merchandise, the t-shirts, the toys, and the graphic novels. Periodicals will be I'll maybe, if I'm launching a new title, I'll print up a comic of a dummy first issue, which I'll give out for free, so that you can actually get a taste for it and then order the graphic novel.
Yeah, you're seeing more of a free comic book day platform implemented on a more regular basis.
On a more regular basis, not waiting for new.
Without having to wait for the month. And what's kind of cool is you can read those books and say because I think issue 1s are they're very difficult, and because it's you want to get even with the book I'm writing right now, it's you got to include everything, because if I'm just going to have that issue 1, it's got to leave people salivating and wanting more, and you really got to put all your strength into that in order to get people to come back and want to pick up the trade. But there's also this aspect of I really like reading single issues, because I can read it and put it down, and then I can stow it away, and I got it, and it makes my collection look cool. And I think what we're seeing right now at DC is also kind of it's an experiment, and just because, and the one thing I've kind of come to realize is, just because they're making this move, or just because something's happening that's drastic at DC or Marvel or whatever, doesn't mean the entire industry is collapsing, because there's such a bigger industry out of it. As long as you have a person that has an idea, that wants to put something out there, they're going to do it. I mean, you were part of an independent publisher, and you went and got a movie made with The Rock, starring The Rock, and there's a story to it too. But the point is that you don't need to just look at the, what the big two are doing. Yeah, I think you're right in the sense that they're the much bigger ship, and that, we kind of, ride on, I don't want to say that we ride on their coattails, but they kind of steer things. They're the gateway to people to come in and explore this medium and see that it's more than just superheroes and, high concept stuff, that you can do pretty much anything in this field,
Well, I know when I first started publishing, at that particular time, independent publishers were first sort of, coming out. We had there was a publisher in the UK called Trident. there was starting to put out creator-owned titles, or kind of what I call semi-creator-owned titles, which is, it's the creators technically own them, but they can't do anything with them without the publisher's consent. So it's you get control of your own property, but anything outside of the comic is like you can't do anything without the publisher. So it's a kind of a joint ownership. But there was there was Trident. There we had Eclipse. You had Dark Horse starting. So you had these companies starting to grow, and the way it was at that particular instant is Marvel and DC and Archie Comics. Let's not forget Archie.
Yes, they're too.
Yeah, they're what I call the feeders into the market. Like they were producing the comics that sold in volume, that had kids of all ages. I say kids of all ages because I still think
that's the right way.
I still think of myself as a kid at heart. But it's so. But you've got that cycle of at the time you'd have maybe you're 6 or 7 when you start reading comics, and by the time you get to 10 or 11, you've probably dropped out. You stopped reading them. But for those that carry on and keep reading them, at some point you're going to reach an age where it's like, I want something more. And that's what guys like Eclipse, Dark Horse, and myself were trying to do. We weren't looking to compete with Marvel and DC, and they weren't. It didn't seem like they were wanting to compete with us. It was, hey, look, you're going to have some people leaving you. They're going to stop reading your stuff because it's they've matured, so we'll give them something else to read. But what happened was Marvel and DC wanted the market we'd created. So they started aging up their titles, and to keep, because like when your Alan Moore decides, well, I've written my favorite characters now, and I want to go off and do something more mature now. They wanted to keep them by giving them the chance to do something more mature and stay with the company. Unfortunately, what that did was, and we saw this across the board, and unfortunately, it spread even to other countries where, even like I think even 2000 AD in the UK, it grew with its audience. It no longer became entry level where you couldn't be a kid and pick up 2000 AD anymore. It suddenly started to become much more mature than that. And so you don't have, and if you don't replace it, it's okay to do that. But if you don't replace those titles with something else that is going to bring people in, you're ultimately going to run out of people. Like, what's bringing your audience in? And Marvel and DC seem to be doing this, aging up. We now have the Black Label edition with DC Comics, but fortunately, 2 other things happened that started to bring in new readers that had nothing to do with Marvel and DC. One was the success of manga. Manga accounts to, in the bookstore market, manga accounts to about approximately a third of the book trade. And the other source was Scholastic. Scholastic decided, well, Marvel and DC have completely ignored this younger age group now, they love comics still. They didn't stop wanting to read comics. It's just that no one was producing
there. Even at my kid's public library, or his school library. Sorry, public library has a great comic selection, but his school library, I was talking with his librarian, and she's like, we don't have any comics. Kids eat them up, but we don't have anything. And yeah, I mean, I remember there was a point in, I think it was the early 90s, when I'd done a little bit of work for DC, and enough to warrant getting their care package their little monthly care package of, here's everything we published this month. Back when, I mean, when you think about it, I hadn't done that much for them, and I still got a care package. So you can imagine like how much money they were spending on sending out all their
monthly comics and graphic novels and such to everybody. But I suddenly realized, like, when I actually looked through them all, I hardly wanted any of them. I mean, it was nice that I'm all chuffed. I'm like, oh, look, I've got the DC care package. And then I realized, like, I didn't really want any of it. And I couldn't give it to hospitals because the material was getting too graphic. And the other thing, the big thing that was missing was everything had become so continuity driven. And so
pick up it's not like you can just pick up a standalone issue of Batman anymore.
Yeah. So if I give a hospital like here's these 2 boxes of comics I got for the last 2 months, there's not a complete story in any of the comics. It's all part 4 and part 5 of something, so there's no beginning or end, or it might be the first 2 episodes of something, and they're not going to be able to read the ending, and none of them are fulfilling reads, which thankfully you can get with a graphic novel. And that's the thing that Scholastic realized, which is, no, just give them a graphic novel, like, straight off, and it's a complete read. That's what manga was doing. Manga was, here, take a 150, 200-page book. And even though the story continues, you got such a big chunk, you actually felt, oh, that felt good. Oh, I can't wait for the next one.
We're not talking about sales in, like, the low quarter millions. We're talking about sales that are like 50 million and up. I mean, these books, like, what is it? The one about the dog?
Dogman.
Dogman.
By Dave Pilkey, who did Captain Underpants.
Yeah. I mean, look at what those guys did. I mean, they have properties
I think all the Dogman books, I think, are currently in all of them, and I think there's about 8 or 9 of them, are all in the top 10. Like, literally, if you look at his top 10, the top 10 selling books, and here's another interesting fact, is when the New York Times, you have the New York Times bestseller list, and you know how they break it down into thrillers, dramas, all these different categories. So here's the top 10 here, here's the top 10 here, top 10 there. If they just did the top 10 selling books, full stop, period, they would all be Dogman. Because Stephen King wouldn't be. Stephen King might come in at, like, number 10. Dogman sells 800,000 copies, like, the first week it's released. Raina Telgemeier, who her books like Smile and Sister.
Yes.
Bang! She has print runs of 1 million copies, first printing.
And here's the thing, folks. For those of you who don't know, like, comic sales are nowhere near those numbers. Like, if you look at your direct market, Marvel or DC comic, a standard issue of Batman maybe sells, somewhere between 100 and 200,000 copies. Now, back in the day, we're talking, those are the kinds of numbers that would have gotten a comic canceled. Especially when comics were much cheaper too. Now they like cost as much as $5 just to get one single issue. And I'm wondering, Dave, to kind of work off of that, do you think that the constant inflation of price in comics is affecting people's ability to want to jump on it? Because the one thing I always kind of did was
absolutely
draw the line.
Look. I mean, go back. If you go back, when I remember buying comics when they were like 20 cents each, right? In fact, I might even predate that. It was, imagine, for $1 getting at least 5 comics. $1. Now, if you factor in inflation, I think, based on what comics were selling, what the cover price of a comic, 20 cents back in the early 70s. If you factor in inflation, today, comics should be about, I think, $1.70, $1.80 or something like that. They should not be $5. And, it's like, when I was a kid, I was an absolute comic geek. Like, I spent everything on comics. Anything my parents gave me, anything my grandparents gave me, and my aunts and uncles gave me. This was back in a time when they used to have the equivalent of like 25 cents on a bottle when you returned it to get you, like if you collected all the empties. Like I would, like there was my local park. We had two big parks nearby, and both had coffee shops, like coffee shop cafes in them. And what I would do is literally like 2 or 3 times a week, I would go all around the park with a bag, collecting up these bottles, taking them back so I could get that money back on them all, so that I could go and buy some comics. But I got everything. I got every Marvel comic I could get my hands on, every DC comic I could get my hands on. I found there was shops where I could buy Charlton comics. I brought my British Weekly comics. I brought heavy metal. You know, it was all of these. I was buying all of these, and as a kid at school, well, a kid at school, even, you know, you basically have to be one of those trust fund kids with a credit card to get anything like a decent selection of comics now at a comic store, which, considering we are a collectors based market, if you can't collect everything, then why are you going to collect it at all? Like, if you can't get a complete set of everything, like, think about it. Like, it's 1,000 issues of Detective Comics coming up. So with Batman and Detective Comics. I mean, no one, like literally, there's like a handful of people on this planet who only if they were so inclined could they go out and buy a complete set of Detective Comics. You can't collect it.
You can't. It's just too much out there now. And the thing that I found interesting is with Kickstarter initiatives, one of the things I'm definitely investigating with my next campaign is when you get involved, when you get other creators involved and you create retailer packages, and what you do is you hire an artist to do, say, like a variant cover that's exclusive to certain retailers and things like that, that really helps boost their confidence in what you're doing and their support of what you're doing. But on top of that, it creates that collectibles market for independent comics. Like there's this one creator, Frank Gogol. He put out a book called No Heroine, and he's raised thousands of dollars for various charity causes and all kinds of stuff off of variants of his book, you know, and he's sold out at the retail level before the book was even released. I was very lucky that I was able to score a copy of the book myself. I haven't read it yet, but I'm thoroughly impressed by those kinds of efforts, because someone had to sit down and do the legwork to make that happen. They saw a vision for how to bring their project out there, and that is creativity, my friends. That is creativity at the ground level.
Well, I'm gonna actually plug something I'm doing right now.
Sure, please. That's what you're here to do.
Well, I have I do a podcast every 2 weeks with Al Mega and Chris Buse. It's
Al's
called
the man.
Yeah, Al's absolutely the man, and Chris is the professor of comics, and it's called the International Comic Crusaders. And just this past Sunday, we had Jimmy Palmiotti on, and Jim has been in the industry probably as long as I have, and so it was good to get him on. He's spent a lot of time working with DC Comics, so it was good to get his perspective on DC. It was good to get his perspective on where the industry is going. But it was also, you know, we also helped, you know, we promoted his Kickstarter he's working on. And one of the things he's doing with Kickstarter I thought was brilliant, is the slabbing that you get now with comics, know, when they put you
the CGC grading.
Well, the guys that do that live just down the street from him. So he's been doing slabbing on his latest Kickstarter, and sold out. And it's doing those, coming up with imaginative ideas that you've got people like me, like I kick on these Kickstarters, but I want to read the book.
I'm no master at it, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I just want to read his books. But there are people out, you know, there's obviously that market that want to collect. And, you know, a lot of that collecting is also trading and the value thing. So he's covering all grounds. And so that's the thing with Kickstarters is, you know, it's coming up with lots of different ideas, because, you know, it's you know, your initial focus initially is like, I have my book, I'm going to sell it. And it's like, well, yeah, but what do you do after those first few days of when everyone's sort of like, who's going to kick on it has kicked on it? What are your stretch goals? What else are you bringing into it? What else are you going to get people excited about with it? And so I just thought that Jimmy had a really good, like, you know, very good, his approach to that. And also, you know, he's someone who, like, particularly in light of what's happening, not just at DC Comics, but with the industry in general, he's moving more to Kickstarter. It's like, well, you know, he's got a very good dedicated following. There's a lot of people like myself who like what he does. So why not just keep doing Kickstarters? He'll still write Harlequin for DC, and
the way you look at it now, it's basically a way to kind of bridge those fans and get them over to the stuff that he's doing. But another thing that I like to look at too is just looking at the way this industry has changed. When it started out, it's like, you know, going back to the days of Schuster and Siegel, you kind of needed a publisher, and they were the mothership, right? But now, as time has gone on, if you really look at it, we've all, like, if you want to build a top-selling comics company, you can do it from your own garage. You don't need anything other than, you know, money, I guess, and startup capital, you know, and it's gonna be tough and all this stuff, but the creativity can help leverage that out, you know. And
absolutely. I mean, think about it. Like, you know, Kickstarter was made for times like this. Like, everyone that's involved in the production of a comic book usually, like these days, works from home. Like, writers, the artists, the colorists, the letterer, they all work from home. So, and when you're doing a Kickstarter, the only people that are physically have to show up to a job with other people there are the printer.
Yep.
And even there, that's becoming more and more automated. So, you know, and you're not really putting, they run such a tight ship, and they, you know, most printers are so clean and have to stay that way that, you know, they're already taking sort of, you know, super good precautions anyway. So there's a good chance that, you know, if you're doing that, if you're doing a Kickstarter, it's a very safe way of, you know, getting your comics out, getting it straight to someone's hands. It's, you know, unless you're in an area where your post box has been ripped out and taken away, you know, you can get it mailed, hopefully, at some point to your front door.
Right, exactly. And you know, that's one of the things that's really amazing is we can all find it takes creativity to come up with those ideas of what people are going to want, and then you have to be excited and passionate enough about it to actually for it to sell. Like with my last campaign, I discovered I had a big stack of my very first trial edition prints of YI Soon Shin. And I'm like, well, what do I do with this? Well, I got them slabbed, and I sold them for, you know, $100 a pop. And that was just 5 copies I had slabbed. It was just an experiment, but that was the first thing to go. And I was like, wow, there's, you know, and I never really tapped into the collector's market or the variant covers. I always hated that stuff because I always felt like, well, it's diverging the audience's attention. You know, now you got to have, like, I got to spend $30 just to have every single cover of one fucking comic that's not probably going to be worth anything down the road. I just wanted to give my audience, like, here it is. This is the brass tacks, and that's it. And I never got involved in that racket. But it's not really a racket when you really think about it. When you're running your own ship and you can't produce 52 titles a month like Marvel and DC can, doing those variants can really help reach a market that is actually tapped into collecting, but it also allows you to kind of have some fun with it and work with different creators. You can bring on anybody you want to do, you know, a cool cover, anybody that's interested, and, you know, it can have really sweet benefits in the end.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's don't forget that a lot of people that collect, like, who might get those CGC editions, etc. they're probably already buying. They're probably also buying a regular edition because they want to read it as well. You
Right.
know, so it's something they like doing, and okay, great. I mean, you know, it's the only part of the industry it's kind of like I sometimes get a little despondent in is it's the like particularly it seems I notice it more with DC. So I'm sorry, DC, if you know if you're not the only one doing this, but I notice it more with you guys. Is every single comic now has like all these variant covers, and you know the anniversary issue of Detective is something like at least 27 covers.
Oh my God, yes. It's
you know, Action Comics 1000.
Sorry, that's my reaction.
Yeah, I mean it's like, you know, because what they're hoping is that there's hoping that someone out there who's going to try and collect them all. And there might be.
I think they're hoping for more than just one person. You know, they gotta have their bets placed that it's going to be like a bunch of people. But you know,
but you see the thing though is that, you know, you're focusing on that instead of finding a way of producing material that people actually want to pick up and read.
That's the key. That is,
you know, and I think that I've read what DC have said publicly about their cutbacks and things like that, and they will be cutting back titles. I personally hope they're cutting back titles and keeping them cut back. Like when, you know, if you're producing 60 or more titles a month that are all $4 to $5 each, there's no way anyone can afford it all. And I found myself, I think for me, it was more, you know, getting married, having kids, the kids, like I wanted the kids to take up my time. So I actually just stopped reading a lot of comics because I just didn't have the time to read them. But I was already getting to that stage of, you know, it's getting too expensive, and you know, you suddenly realize that when you, well, it's also I was already getting to that point. In fact, quite before that, I'd got to that stage of where, see, when you're a collector, when I was a kid, and I was picking up everything I could find, I found that because they were cheap and I could afford them all, what I was doing is I was like, I'd look through it, and even if I didn't think it was that great, I still kept it because there's a good chance the next issue might have a better artist or a better creative team, or, you know, I didn't want a gap. You know, it's that collector thing. I didn't want a gap. And so you didn't have any gaps. You had complete runs. And I found that when I started, like, I was going like, okay, well, I'm going to stop buying that title. I'm going to stop buying that title because I really like this title. And then, so I stopped buying a load of books, and I started that thing of, well, I don't read these anymore, so let me take them down to the comic store and see if I can get some credit or some money for it. And then you started looking at the titles you did like, and then you go back through them, go like, well, I'm just going to keep the runs that I really like. And when you realize that you might have had like 300 issues of a title, but you end up with 150, because 150 of them, you realize like you didn't actually really, they weren't that great. They were okay, but they're not keepers. And you realize like, oh, if I had the same mentality now, I would never have bought any of these 150 books.
And on that note, Dave, I hate to do this, but I got to run. I sent my wife and my in-laws on vacation, so I'm stuck home with 2 kids, and my mom is watching them right now, and I gotta run home. I hate to do this because I say this from the bottom of my heart. I could go on with you for another 3 or 4 hours uninterrupted and continue this really fascinating conversation.
We'll carry on with this another day, or do you know what? We'll have you on our podcast.
It would be a sincere honor, my friend. Before we go, do us a favor. Tell us where we can find you and support you, and you know, take it away, my friend.
Well, as you can see here,
Yeah, it's right there.
That's my Twitter account. I go under DAVE ELLIOT for everything now. So it's my DeviantArt account. So I'm on Twitter with that. You can find, if you Google the International Comics Collective, you can find us on Facebook. But you can, every single platform known to man, you can find us on. I do that with, as I said before, Big Al Mega of the Comic Crusaders and Chris Buse. But you can find us on Twitter. We're there chatting 24/7 about the comics we love. So that's the best place to find us. You can ask us anything. We'll answer it. We don't care.
Awesome.
Yeah. I do have some projects that I'm working on right now, but we run out of time and I can't talk about them.
No, please. You know what? I'm going to give you that chance.
No, I'm not going to tell you now. I'm not going to tell you now.
Tell us one at least. Go for it.
Nope. You're going to have to get me back. You're going to have to get me back to talk about them.
All right, my friend. I'm so sorry. I hate that I have to do this. But we will figure a way to get you back on the show. And
anytime, mate. Anytime. Yeah. It'd be good. It's always great talking to you.
Dude, likewise, man. And I hope we get to see each other soon at conventions once all this kind of, once we figure out a way not to get rid of this, but how to take care of each other, as you're saying, as it becomes more of a normal thing. So I'm all for that, and I think your heart's in the right place, and it's always a
yours
pleasure
too, man.
you. Take care, my friend.
All right, take care. Bye, Onrie.
Yeah, see you, dude. What an excellent guy. And folks, let me just tell you right now, be sure to check out what Dave's doing on the ICC. Both him and Al Meg are solid people, and they've got a lot of great stuff that they're talking about. I haven't actually had a chance to sit down and listen to full episodes yet, but I did have a chance to listen in on the Jimmy Palmiotti one, and it is riveting stuff. So I will be back tomorrow with another guest, and I will let you guys know in the morning. I always like to let you know at the last minute because I like to keep you on the edge of your toes. So I will see you guys tomorrow, and until then, onward to victory.